Internet baby.
Did we slip into another dimension? Was it just a scam to get our home address? Did the contest ever exist? We may never know. Has anyone experienced the Mandela Effect? Around 10 years ago, when I received an email from a person I'd never heard from before about a series of courses for something I had also never heard about. I googled it, as you do, and ended up enrolling on the courses, which were fantastic, and exactly what I needed right then. After the first of the series of courses was completed, I thanked the instructor, who had sent the email, and thanked her also for sending me the email. "What email?" she asked. "You know, the one you sent inviting me onto these courses. I never sent you an email. I'd never heard of you until you contacted me." "Well, I know I read the email, and my wife also read it, and I saved it on my computer. I'll send you a copy." "Yes, you do that," she replied. So once I arrived home, I talked to my wife about this exchange, which she remembered well, and looked on the computer for the email. It was not there. Strange things happen in this world. It's interesting to note them, but not necessarily have to be able to explain them. As a kid, I loved the Dick Van Dyke Show. In one episode, there was some concern over a spate of burglaries or some such. Rob was trying to reassure Laura, and she brought up the Boston Strangler. Rob responded by saying something along the lines of, "Well, who wouldn't open the door to Tony Curtis?" Although I hadn't seen the movie, I understood this to mean that Tony Curtis played the Boston Strangler in it. This was part of my knowledge from that point on, and when talking to people about the movie, I could tell them that Tony Curtis played the Boston Strangler. Fast forward a couple of decades. Sometime around 1989, the Boston Strangler was coming on TV, and I figured it was time to finally see the movie. While watching it, I noted how effectively they used the split-screen technique. I happen to know that the split-screen technique started to be used around 1967, and congratulated myself when the movie ended, and the date showed it to have been made in 1968. But then I had a sudden thought. The last Dick Van Dyke Show aired while I was living in a little village called Waynfleet. We moved from Waynfleet to Melton at the end of 1967. This meant that the Dick Van Dyke episode was aired at least 1 year before the movie came out. After some research, I found out that in reality, the DVD show had ended in June of 1966, making it 2 years before the Boston Strangler movie had been made. So how did Rob Petrie know that the Boston Strangler was played by Tony Curtis in a movie that hadn't been made yet? I have since researched every episode of the DVD show, and nowhere does he say anything about Tony Curtis in the Boston Strangler. Well, of course not, how could he have? But the unarguable fact was that I knew Tony Curtis played the Boston Strangler, because I'd heard it on the Dick Van Dyke Show. I've never resolved this. So I remember in about 2002, I used to go to MTV.com and download free MP3s from their Discovery section. I found Secondhand Serenade Fall For You. I remember listening to it in my car before I could drive. I had it burned on a CD. I eventually forgot about the song, rediscovered it about a year ago, and it said 2008. I was so confused. There's no possible way I heard this in 2008, so I checked the band. They didn't even form until 2004. So I have no idea. I'm just super confused about the whole thing. Welp, here goes. I told my parents this story maybe 10 years ago, and they laughed right in my face and called me nuts. I went to so many funerals with my grandma as a kid. She watched me while my folks were at work, and I spent most summer with her on the family farm. Sometimes there were no funerals to attend, sometimes there were 2 in a week. There's really only one that pops in my head, and no one believes the service even happened. It was at my family's church. A middle-aged woman had died, and we were attending her service. It was a packed house, and folks were wailing and crying, and it was so hot that the ushers were passing out those shitty paper fans that you see in every black church in the summertime. The choir was singing, and the congregation was seated waiting for the homegoing sermon to begin. The choir was made up of great aunts and uncles and people I'd known all my life. My grandpa played piano for every choir in that church. I remember trying to focus on what they were doing because being at church was a total sensory overload for me. That's when I watched one of the choir members drop to the floor lifeless while everyone was singing. The person to the left of him, I believe it was my great aunt Tamer, had this horrified look on her face. She covered her mouth with her hands in shock. Here's the part where my dad almost passed out from laughing so hard. The funeral directors walked up to this dude and declared he was dead. They walked up to the casket that was currently occupied, pulled the woman out of it, and walked her out the door. I still remember the way her lifeless legs looked in her stockings. They put the man that had just collapsed into the newly empty casket, and continued the funeral like nothing happened. A year ago, the mall I now work at had a contest to name the new food court they were developing. The contest involved writing your name, address, and telephone number on the slip before inserting it into the box. I saw this with my friend and promptly put something dumb like Footopia or something like that before walking away. A year later, my friend and I were walking past the spot they held the contest at, and suddenly I remembered about the contest. So we checked the mall's map, and to our surprise it was simply called Food Court. Confused by this, we decided to ask the man at the help desk, and he promptly said, "We never had a contest like that." Did we slip into another dimension? Was it just a scam to get our home address? Did the contest ever exist? We may never know. My girlfriend is 29. She has very little pop culture knowledge. She's not dumb, she just isn't into TV and movies. Up until the other day, she had never heard of the Mandela Effect. I have a lot of old DVDs. Last week, we were organizing them, and I asked her to tell me which movie she's actually watched before. We got to Jingle All the Way, and she said she had watched that one before. Just for fun, I asked her if she had watched any other Sinbad movies. She said she had. Then, I asked her which Sinbad movie was her favorite. Without hesitation, she said, "I remember liking that genie movie." I was shocked. I asked, "Do you remember the name of that movie?" She thought for a second and said, "Shazam." I honestly couldn't believe it. I asked her when she watched it, and she told me that her grandma had the VHS tape, and she would watch it when she went over to her house growing up. The tape originally belonged to her cousin who is older. I was laughing the whole time, and she didn't know why. I briefly explained it to her, and she just dismissed it. Yesterday, I showed her an article about the Sinbad movie and me. She is 100% convinced the movie exists. She got very angry when I showed her all of the info in the Reddit threads. She is 100% sure that the movie didn't have Shaq in it. I don't know. I remember Chasm. I am a huge Shaq fan. So, I remember watching that movie. It sounds a lot like the same movie that a lot of the Sinbad genie believers describe. I'm a skeptic, but I am officially blown away. My girlfriend is now determined to find the VHS tape at her grandma's house. We will see. Update. After all of the discussion on the thread, I asked her to describe the plot of the movie. All she could remember was that two white kids found a lamp. She couldn't recall much more other than picturing Sinbad in a genie outfit. She's 29. She said she watched it several times when she was between 7 to 10. But it wasn't regularly. Her grandma lives 2 states away. The only thing she is 100% sure of is that the genie was definitely not Shaq. She says she definitely would have remembered that. Her details aren't great. I'm sorry, everyone. Update. I know some have asked for an update. Nothing to really report. Grandma says there are no VHS tapes at the house anymore. She said she doesn't remember owning the movie, but she just bought movies for the grandkids. That's all. I'm still a skeptic. You're welcome. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the girl who was found dead in a water tank at the Cecil Hotel. I've added a link for those who are intent to demonstrate something I've noticed. I'm a bit of a death, murder, and conspiracy enthusiast, and remember reading about Alyssa Lamb a while ago, and remember very clearly that people were saying that the hatch to the water tank was closed, further adding to how odd this case is, because how could she have closed it from inside the tank? But now, every video I watch or article one read has someone very clearly stating that they went up and immediately saw that the hatch was open. For example, in the following link, it is quoted, "I noticed the hatch to the main water tank was open and looked inside, and saw an Asian woman lying face up in the water approximately 12 inches from the top of the tank. Anybody else got this?" As a kid, I distinctly remember watching the movie Flushed Away in 2002. I thought it was hilarious, but couldn't find it again after the one time I caught it on some cable channel. Flash forward to 2006. When it released, I remember telling my mother and my friends that it was the movie I was talking about. My mother was astounded. She took me to the theater, and I predicted the entire movie, was able to quote things word for word as they were happening on screen, and told my mother what was going to happen before it actually did. She doesn't remember this happening now, but it's still so vivid in my mind.